Hello, welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from the past, old newspaper articles in the public domain. We look at them with our modern eyes, our modern perspective, and see what we can learn from them. On this microfiche time capsule, we are looking back at the Biographical Encyclopedia, Volume 1, and this time we are looking at an article entitled Wight, Lyman. And Lyman Wight, yes? He was one of the members of the Quorum of the 12, as all of the people we are looking at recently. And he was very, I want to say militant. I believe he was actually a member of the military. He wasn't a member of the militia, but he was specifically a member of the military, and which was unusual at the time because the military wasn't that organized. But every once in a blue moon, you'd find somebody who was part of it. And he was one of them. And I remember him being incredibly devoted to Joseph Smith. Like, just absolutely devoted to Joseph Smith. And 100% on board with him. But after the martyrdom, he fell away, basically. And I want to say he originally joined a different spin-off group before eventually making one of his own. And he went to Texas or something. And then he was released from his calling as an apostle. But he was an apostle for a while, and he was 100% behind Joseph Smith. But he just wasn't into Brigham Young, I guess. So you can't fault him for that. I mean, loyal to a fault, I guess I would say. Which, there are worse things to say about somebody, loyal to a fault. Other than that, I don't know that much about his life, and so I'm looking forward to learning about it. But that's what I know off the top of my head. He was very, very involved in the doings and workings in Missouri, and in Nauvoo. But I don't know much about him past that. So, anyway, let's take a look at the article. Wight, Lyman, a member of the Council of 12 Apostles from 1841 to 1849. Was the son of Levi Wight and Sarah Corbin, and was born May 9th, 1796. Okay, so he was quite a bit older than Joseph Smith. He was a good 10 years older. In the township of Fairfield, Herkimer County, New York. Herkimer, is that right? Herkimer, I don't know. Correct my pronunciation in the comments. I'm sure somebody lives around there. He served the Republic in the War of 1812-15 with Great Britain. Okay, so he was in the War of 1812. So he was in the military, yeah? He united with Isaac Morley and others in forming a society in Kirtland, Ohio, conducted on the common stock principle. Okay, being one phase in the rise and progress of the Campbellite Church. Okay, so he was a part of Sidney Rigdon's group then, yeah? Is that right? Huh. Oliver Cowdery. Okay, maybe. He was baptized into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints by Oliver Cowdery in 1830, and was soon afterwards ordained to the office of an elder. Okay, so he was baptized really early as well. That surprises me that he wasn't one of the original 12 then. He was ordained to the office of a high priest by Joseph Smith at a conference held in Kirtland in June 1831. While at that conference, he testified he had a vision and saw the Savior. Really? He went to Missouri in 1831 by revelation, and soon after went to Cincinnati on a mission to preach the gospel. On arriving in that city, he called at a hotel and engaged his board for several weeks. The landlord asked him what his business was. He replied he was a preacher of the gospel after the order of Melchizedek. He created so much curiosity that they wished to hear him preach. He told him that was his business, and if they would open the courthouse, he would soon do so willingly. Okay, so he's trying to find a venue for the number of people. They obtained the house, and he delivered a series of lectures and built up a branch of the church. Okay, and baptized upwards of 100. It's interesting to me that there's this many details, because usually there's not that many details. They'll be like, oh yeah, he went to this place and baptized this many people. But, having it be that detailed on the landlord asking him about it and people being curious and having to book the the town hall, the courthouse. It just surprises me that there's that many details. But I wonder why there are. Did he write them down, or did somebody else report about them? That's my question, I guess. The family of Higbees were among the first baptized. They were fishermen, and Wight would fish with them through the day and preach at night. Okay, that's kind of cute. One evening, he went from the fish net to the courthouse and stood at the top of a stove barefooted with his trousers rolled up to his knees and his shirt sleeves up to his elbows, and preached for 2 hours. Some of the people remarked, "He preaches the truth, though he does not look much like a preacher." Many that he baptized went to Jackson County, Missouri, and were with him through the persecutions of 1833. Yeah, kind of unfortunately, yeah. A lot of people were asked to move to Jackson County, and it wasn't until later that they realized how bad the conditions were going to be. During that persecution, he was a dread to his enemies and a terror to evildoers, and his life was often sought after. He commanded the brethren in Jackson County in their defense against the mob, yeah. In one instance, he was chased by 7 men about 6 miles. They were fully armed and came upon him so suddenly that he had to mount his horse with a blind bridle, without any saddle or arms except a pocket knife. Jeez. His horse being fleet, he escaped by outrunning them and leaping a deep, wide ditch, where none of his pursuer dares to follow. Well, that was just straight up lucky now, wasn't it? You know, the horse could have, stepped into a hole or something and broken its leg, while it was running that full lap blown out. You know, it's not that common to actually outrun somebody on a horse. But I guess it can happen. July 23rd, 1833, he signed an agreement with others that the Saints would leave Jackson County before the first day of January, 1834. So they had 6 months to leave. But before that time, they were all driven out. Yes, they were. After the Saints were driven out of Jackson County into Clay County, volunteers were called for to go and visit the prophet at Kirtland. Several of the elders were asked by Bishop Partridge if they could go, but they made excuses. Lyman Wight then stepped forward and said he could go as well as not. The bishop asked him what situation his family was in. He replied his wife lay by the side of a log in the woods with a child 3 days old. Yeah, I've heard this story. And he had 3 days' provision on hand, so he thought he could go very well. Wow. Seriously? Okay. Gosh. I understand that he's extraordinarily willing to work and obedient, but leaving your wife in that kind of a state, I'm sorry, but I blame you for not being there for her. She clearly needed somebody, and you're like, no, she's fine. Thanks. Sheesh. I wonder if she was even, recovered from the birth yet. Some people, it depends on the birth. How traumatic was the birth? Was it super easy and she was able to bounce back and was actually doing okay? Or was it, really difficult and she's still recovering weeks later? Yeah? Because there are a couple different kinds of births. I'm just saying. I sincerely hope that she had the first kind, where she just bounced back and was actually doing fairly well. And even though the baby was 3 days old, yeah? She can't be moved really, because the baby and, open wounds and stuff, but, relatively doing okay, yeah? That's what I'm hoping was the case. Parley P. Pratt next volunteered, and they went together to Kirtland in February 1834. On their arrival at Kirtland, the prophet obtained the word of the Lord, and they were commanded to gather up the strength of the Lord's house to go up to Zion. And it was the will of the Lord that there should be 500 men, but not to go up short of 100. In fulfillment of this commandment, Lyman Wight went through Pennsylvania, and he attended a conference at Avon, New York, March 15, 1834. He also went through Michigan. I don't know why that was overly specific. That's okay. He also went through Michigan, northern Indiana, and Illinois, and assisted Hiram Smith in gathering up a company of 18, who joined Zion's camp at Salt River, Missouri, June 8, 1834. Where the camp was reorganized, and Lyman Wight was appointed the second officer. He walked the whole journey from Michigan to Clay County without stockings on his feet. By the appointment of Joseph Smith, he gave a written discharge to each member of the camp when they were dismissed. That's wow, okay. July 3rd, 1834, he was ordained one of the High Council in Missouri. He was one of the signers of an appeal to the world, making a proclamation of peace in Missouri in July 1834. And spent the summer of 1834 in Clay County, Missouri. He took a job making 100,000 bricks and building a large brick house for Colonel Michael Arthur in Clay County. Wilford Woodruff, Milton Holmes, Heman T. Hyde, and Stephen and Benjamin Winchester labored for him through the season. Being counseled to go to Kirtland and get his endowment, Elder Wight started in the way in fall of 1835 and preached his way through Kirtland, baptizing such as would receive his testimony. While on the journey, he called at the city of Richmond, Indiana, and gave out an appointment to preach at the courthouse. He walked through the city, and being a stranger, was unknown, and wherever he went, people were blackguarding the Mormons. Blackguarding, okay. I've never heard that being used as a verb. Like, I've heard it used as a noun, blackguard, yeah? But, like, blackguarding the Mormons, and many declared that they would tar and feather the preacher when he came to meeting them that night. Let me see. What is the verb blackguarding? To blackguard. Abuse or disparage. Okay. See, I've only ever heard the noun form, a man who behaves in a dishonorable or contemptible way. That's what I understood it, but then abuse or disparage is apparently the way it is used as a verb. Okay. Just FYI. Thank you, Google. At the time of the appointment, Elder Wight was at his post. There being no light provided, he went and brought candles and lighted the room. Oh, bought candles, yeah. The house was soon filled with men who brought tar and feathers for the Mormon elder. He preached about 2 hours, reproving them most severely for their meanness, wickedness, and mobocratic spirit. At the close of the meeting, he said, "If there is a gentleman in this congregation, I wish he would invite me to stay with him overnight." Whereupon, a gentleman stepped forward and tendered him an invitation, which he willingly accepted. Well, that's cool. You know, like just some, he's like, I know everybody hates me in here, but is there any place I could stay? Gosh. His host said, "Mr. Wight, it is astonishing how you have become so well acquainted with the people here, for you have described them very correctly." He was kindly entertained and furnished with money in the morning to aid him on his journey. That's really kind. He spent the winter of 1835-36 in Kirtland and received his endowment. He returned to Missouri in 1836. David W. Patton, having preferred a charge against Elder Wight for teaching false doctrine, he was tried before the High Council at Far West, April 24th, 1837. Really? It was decided that he did teach false doctrine. Okay. He made the required acknowledgments. He opposed the selling of land in Jackson County, Missouri, and considered William W. Phelps and John Whitmer in transgression for selling theirs. Well, it's a bit holier than thou, but that's okay. June 28, 1838, he was chosen and ordained second counselor to John Smith, president of the stake at Adirondack by Joseph Smith. Yeah, 1838. So yeah, he was in the middle of things in Missouri. Sheriff Morgan of Daviess County had agitated the people of the surrounding counties by asserting that he had writs against Joseph Smith and Lyman Wight, which he could not serve without endangering his life. He invited the people to assemble together in Daviess County with their arms so that he could summon them as a posse comitatus? Comitatus. I'm going to have to look that one up. It sounds very Latin. Comitatus. A Germanic warrior retinue bound by an oath of fealty to a lord. Okay, that's not it. To a county or territory governed by a count. No. 3. The concept behind the American Posse Comitatus Act, which allows the military to assist in civilian law enforcement under specific circumstances. Okay, there we go. That's it. So basically, it's a group of people. It's basically a mob that is, like, sanctioned by the state, yes? Like, given the nod by the military, be like, that's fine. You do that. So that's basically what it was, yeah? So that he could summon them as a posse comitatus to make the arrest. The real design was to murder Joseph Smith and Lyman Wight. Yeah, shocking. As they had not offered any resistance. Neither had the sheriff made any attempt to arrest them. They went before Justice Austin A. King, yeah, a great guy, at Ragland's farm to allay this excitement and gave bonds in the sum of $250 for their appearance in court. Elder Wight subsequently, under the protection of General Atchison's militia, and gave bonds for his appearance in court in the sum of $1,000 on a charge of misdemeanor. How did he have a bond of $1,000 in 1838 for a misdemeanor? Like, that seems incredibly excessive, don't you think? This examination was had in Atchinson's camp at Netherton Spring, Daviess County, surrounded by several hundreds of the mob, and about 100 militia. His life was repeatedly threatened, and it required the energy of Generals Atchison and Doniphan to prevent his murder. At the close of this examination, he asked for 30 writs against members of the mob, but was refused. He was commissioned a colonel in the militia of Caldwell County previous to his removal to Daviess County, and in that county he commanded his brethren while defending themselves against the mob. In October 1838, after learning that Far West was surrounded by a mob, he raised 53 volunteers in Adamandiaman, 25 miles distant, and repaired immediately to Far West to aid in its defense. Well, that is very kind. See, he was zealous. He was very in the middle of it. Where with Joseph and Hiram Smith and others, he was betrayed into the hands of his enemies by Colonel George M. Hinkle on the 31st, and was sentenced by a court-martial to be shot the next morning, November 1st at 8 o'clock. During the evening, General Moses Wilson took him out by himself and tried to induce him to betray Joseph Smith and swear falsely against him, at which time the following conversation took place. General Wilson said, "Colonel Wight, we have nothing against you, only that you are associated with Joe Smith. He is our enemy and a damned rascal, and would take any plan he could to kill us. You are a damned fine fellow, and if you will come out and swear against him, he will spare your life. We will spare your life and give you any office you want. And if you don't do it, you will be shot at tomorrow at 8 o'clock. Well, gee, then no pressure. Sheesh. Colonel Wight replied, "General Wilson, you are entirely mistaken in your man, both in regard to myself and Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith is not an enemy to mankind. He is not your enemy, and is as good a friend as you have got. Had it not been for him, you would have been in hell long ago, for I should have sent you there by cutting your throat, and no other man but Joseph Smith could have prevented me, and you may thank him for your life. And now, if you will give me the boys I brought from Diamond yesterday, I will whip your whole army." The 53 men? They had like 1,000. Oh my gosh. Wilson said, "Wight, you are a strange man, but if you will not accept my proposal, you will be shot tomorrow at 8. Colonel Wight replied, "Shoot and be damned." This was the true character of Lyman Wight. He was true as the sun to Joseph Smith, and would die for his friends. Yeah, absolutely. Like, I will get behind that, and I think that's one of his best characteristics. And you can see how very, very loyal he was to Joseph Smith. Like, that's a very, very strong loyalty. He was taken to Jackson County with Joseph, Hiram, and other prisoners. They were chained together and fed on human flesh by their Christian guards, and he continued to suffer with his brethren until April 15, 1839, when he started with Joseph and Hiram Smith, Alex McRae, and Caleb Baldwin and guard to go to jail in Columbia, Boone County. But on the night of the 16th, the sheriff fell asleep, the guard got drunk, and the prisoners left them, and went to their families and friends in Illinois. October 20th, 1839, Lyman Wight and Reynolds Cahoon were appointed counselors to John Smith, president of the Saints in Iowa Territory. Okay, we're kind of changing subjects, but so yeah, the stuff that he went through in Missouri, absolutely in the middle of it. He was in the middle of it. He was right next to Joseph Smith all the way. Every step of the way. So, you have to admire his loyalty. Absolutely. In January 1841, Elder Wight was called by revelation to be one of the Nauvoo House Association. At the April conference following, he was called and appointed to be one of the 12 apostles, to fill a vacancy caused by the death of David W. Patton. He was chosen and sustained in that position on April 8, 1841. He was also commissioned a brevet, a major general brevet, of the Illinois militia by Governor Carlin. In 1842, he went to Kirtland and rebaptized about 200 of the cold dead members of the church, and brought many of them to Nauvoo. What? And rebaptized about 200 of the cold dead members of the church. What does that mean? Did he bring their bodies back? That's really creepy and weird, and I have no idea what that means. I sincerely hope that Wikipedia can help us with that one, because that's out of the blue and is a wild thing to say. The cold dead members of the church. What? Oh my gosh, did you understand that? It sounds like he went to Kirtland and picked out their bodies and brought them to Nauvoo and baptized them. That's what it sounds like. I don't think that's what they mean, and I sincerely hope that's not what they mean, but my word, what in the world? The cold, dead members of the church. Andrew Jenson, he's the author, sorry. Andrew Jenson, that's, you know what, you could have worded that a little bit better, a little more clear. That's so weird. I am guessing what he means. I'm guessing what he means is that he went to Kirtland, talked to the apostates, convinced them of the truth of the gospel, rebaptized them, and brought them back to Nauvoo. That is what I think is what it's meant, but that is not what it says, and that is a very, very weird way to word that. Oh, I'm sorry. That really caught me off guard. The what? Alright, moving on. July 1st, 1843, he was examined as a witness before the municipal court of Nauvoo and gave a plain, unvarnished account of the persecution against the saints in Missouri, and of the sufferings of Joseph Smith and his fellow prisoners during the winter of 1843-44. He was employed in the Pine Country at Black River, Wisconsin Territory, superintending the procuring of lumber for the temple and Nauvoo house. Okay. In a letter directed to the presidency and 12, dated Black River Falls, February 15, 1844, he wrote his views about preaching to the Indians and going to Texas. In the spring of 1844, he started on a mission through the eastern states and was appointed one of the delegates of the Baltimore Convention. He delivered a speech on Bunker Hill on General Joseph Smith's claims to the presidency of the United States. Okay. And on hearing of the death of Joseph, he returned to Nauvoo with the 12. I'll bet he was devastated. He was so incredibly loyal to him. After his return to Nauvoo, he said, "I would not turn my hand over to be one of the 12. The day was when there was somebody to control me, but that day is past." Yeah. See, he was very stuck on Joseph Smith. He didn't really care for anybody else. When the church removed to the Rocky Mountains, Lyman Wight and George Miller, who both rebelled against the authority of President Brigham Young, went to Texas with a small company of saints and settled a short distance south of the present site of Austin. Wight and Miller subsequently dissolved partnership, and Miller returned 130 miles north with a part of the company. At a meeting held in the Great Salt Lake City Fort, December 3rd, 1848, fellowship was withdrawn from both Wight and Miller. Mr. Wight remained in Texas until his death, which occurred March 31st, 1858, in Mountain Valley. He died very suddenly of epileptic fits, having been sick only 5 hours. Okay, that sounds like a very high fever then. The company of saints who went with him and Miller to Texas had been scattered to the four winds. Some of them, however, were subsequently received back into the church by rebaptism. See also Millennial Star, Volume 27, page 455. Yeah, so I got the end right, you know. Oh, gosh. But yeah, so it's so interesting that, you know, there are some converts of the church that are like this. I saw this on my mission, is that they would get very, very attached to one missionary and had a really hard time staying if they left. You know, if that missionary left. Missionaries get transferred out, they go home, you know, they don't stay forever. And it's amazing to me how some people were very, very stuck on a certain missionary and then would stop coming to church when that missionary left. That was absolutely a thing, and I understand why people felt like that's bad, you know, and that's why you on your mission you try not to let that happen. You try to teach people with your heart, you know, but then as soon make sure that they're solid in the gospel before you leave. Like, you don't want them to be attached to you, you want them to be attached to the gospel. And I feel like Lyman Wight was one of those people who was attached to a person more than the gospel itself. And yeah, I mean, it was a really intense person, though. I sincerely hope that that Wikipedia can clear up that weird point about being like, you know, the cold, dead, you know, people rebaptized. What does that mean? You know? Anyway. Sheesh. So, Lyman Wight. Oh, gosh. He lived kind of a long life, yeah? How old was he when he died? So 62. Yeah, 62. Yeah. For the time it was relatively long life, yeah. I guess it wasn't that long, but... Okay, Lyman Wight, May 9th, 1796 to March 31st, 1858, was an early leader in the Latter-day Saint movement. He was the leader of the Latter-day Saints in Daviess County, Missouri in 1838. In 1841, he was ordained a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. After the death of Joseph Smith resulted in a succession crisis, Wight led his own break-off group of Latter-day Saints to Texas, where they created a settlement. While in Texas, Wight broke the main body of the group led by Brigham Young. Wight was ordained president of his own church, but he later sided with the claims of William Smith, and eventually of Joseph Smith III. Did he really? They didn't mention that in the article. After his death, most of the Wightites, as members of the church were called, joined with the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, our LDS church. Okay. Early life. Lyman Wight was born to Levi Wight and Sarah Corton on May 9th, 1796 in Fairfield, New York. He fought in the War of 1812. On January 5th, 1823, he married Harriet Benton in Henrietta, New York. Sometime around 1826, Wight moved to Warrensville Township, Ohio, and was baptized in the Reformed Baptist, later Disciples of Christ, or Campbellite faith by Sidney Rigdon in May 1829. So he was part of Sidney Rigdon's group. They weren't 100% clear on that earlier. In February 1830, Wight united with Isaac Morley and others in forming a common stock utopian society in Kirtland, Ohio. He eventually married 4 wives and had 11 children. Did he really? I didn't know he had more than one wife at all. Huh. That's interesting. That's really interesting to me. It wasn't that common at the time. It's very unusual that he was. Service in the church. Wight was baptized a member of the Church of Christ by Oliver Cowdery on November 14th, 1830. He was ordained to the high priesthood in June 1831 by Joseph Smith Jr. and was tasked with traveling from Kirtland to Missouri with John Corrill, preaching along the way. He also ordained Joseph Smith... He also ordained Joseph Smith Jr., Joseph Smith Sr., Sidney Rigdon, and many others at the time to the high priesthood. Okay. So, because they did mention in the article that he was ordained a high priest in 1831. So maybe he was one of the first, and they all ordained each other. Yes? I think that's what happened, because otherwise this statement doesn't make sense to me. So he was one of the people who ordained Joseph Smith himself, as well as Joseph Smith Sr., Sidney Rigdon, and many others to the high priesthood, probably in 1831. He stated he had also seen Jesus Christ. And the source on that is Dean C. Jesse, Michael Hubbard McKay, Robert K. Esplin, Richard L. Bushman, whatever, the other authors, the Joseph Smith Papers, Documents, Volume 1, July 1828 to June 1831, Church History Press, page 323. There you go. Sorry about that. There was a lot of authors, and I skipped most of them, so sorry for the ones I skipped. There's too many to list them all, so, okay. Shortly afterwards, Wight went to Missouri and later Cincinnati, Ohio, to preach, where he baptized over 100 people. Yeah, they mentioned that in the article. It says citation needed, so I actually could just throw this one in as a citation for that one. Wight served 11 missions as a member of the church. 11 missions. Jackson County conflict and Zion's camp. With many other converts, Wight went to settle in Independence, Missouri to build the city of Zion. The Mormons in Jackson County were at odds with their non-Mormon neighbors who resorted to vigilantism to drive the church from the county. Yeah. On July 23, 1833, Wight signed an agreement with the vigilantes which specified that the Latter-day Saints would leave Jackson County by 1834. The Saints were driven out anyway into neighboring Clay County. Yeah, they didn't wait that long. The church membership called on several elders to go up to Kirtland to tell Joseph Smith about the events. When the elders refused, Wight stepped forward to make the journey, despite his wife being ill with a 3-day-old child and only 3 days of food. Parley P. Pratt volunteered to go with Wight. Wight and Pratt arrived in Kirtland, Ohio on February 22, 1834. 2 days later, they testified about the conflict in Missouri to the newly formed High Council. This led to the organization of Zion's Camp. Smith sent out men 2 by 2 to recruit volunteers. Wight left on April 21st with Hiram Smith to recruit from the northwestern United States. Recruitment was difficult, as many people did not want to leave their homes to defend others in Missouri. Smith and Wight recruited about 20 individuals, including Hosea Stout, who was not a church member at the time, but was impressed with their preaching. They met with the main company on June 8th at the Salt River in Missouri, bringing a total of 207 men, 11 women, 11 children, and 25 wagons. Good for them. Yeah, that was Zion's Camp. So he was one of the main people responsible for recruiting Zion's Camp. Wight tolerated the conditions of the company, including eating of moldy and rancid food, under the promises from Joseph Smith that they would not be afflicted by it. After a 900-mile march, the members of the camp reached Missouri, where they were smitten with cholera. Yeah, bad water, yeah. They were then discharged without having accomplished their goal of returning the Latter-day Saints to Jackson County. Yeah, but they kind of intimidated their enemies, yeah. It didn't come to an actual battle. At the end of Zion's Camp, Wight wrote up the discharge orders and remained in Missouri according to Smith's request. Remember, everything had to be written by hand back then. I mean, unless they had a printing press, which I don't think they did. Itinerant preaching. For the remainder of 1834, Wight worked many bricks in Missouri. I wonder why it's worded that way. Worked many bricks. He made bricks, yeah, and built a large brick house for Colonel Arthur of Clay County, employing several others, including Wilford Woodruff. Yeah, well, it gives him some money, you know. In 1835, Wight was encouraged to travel to the temple at Kirtland. While on the journey, he preached. He stopped by Richmond, Indiana. He knew that people in the area were antagonistic toward the Mormons, yet he made an appointment to preach at the courthouse. At the appointed time, he went to the courthouse. Okay, so this is the story we actually just got. People with tar and feathers filled the room, ready to lynch him. The event is described thus. He preached about 2 hours, reproving them most severely for their meanness, wickedness, and mobocratic spirit. At the close of the meeting, he said, "If there is a gentleman in the congregation, I wish he would invite me to stay with him overnight." Whereupon a gentleman stepped forward and tendered him an invitation, which he willingly accepted. His host said, "Mr. Wight, it is astonishing how you have become so well acquainted with the people here, for you have described them very correctly." He was kindly entertained and furnished with money in the morning to aid him on his journey. And that was exactly from the article we just read. Like, it's cited. Yeah. Mormon leader in Daviess County. Staying the winter in Kirtland, Wight set out to return to Missouri in 1836. In 1837, Apostle David W. Patton accused him of teaching false doctrine, for which he was tried before the High Council in Far West. Being found guilty, Wight made the necessary acknowledgments and apologies. Settling near the Grand River in Daviess County, Missouri, on about February 1st, 1838, Wight built a house and later a ferry, which became known as Wight's Ferry. Oh, they didn't mention that. I wonder why they didn't mention that. That's interesting. Wight's Ferry, huh? On May 19th, 1838, Joseph Smith paid a visit to Wight's home and ferry. It was from his house that Smith received a revelation about Adam-on-Diamond and foretold the future gathering there. That's cool. Like, you know, I'd like to be there at the time. Well, probably not, because it wasn't very good conditions, but, you know, like, if I had the choice of it being my home or not, then that would have been my choice, yeah. On June 28, 1838, at a conference of local church members, Smith organized a stake at Adam-on-Diamond with his uncle John Smith as president, with Reynolds Cahoon and Wight as counselors. With the organization, members began settling in the area, including new members and refugees from Kirtland. Wight had also become a colonel in the 50th Regiment of the Missouri Regiment. Did they just say regiment twice? Oh, they did say regiment twice, okay. It wasn't just me reading it wrong, okay. In the state militia under the command of General H.G. Parks. By the end of June, he was also head of the Danite organization in Daviess County. Between his several roles, Wight became the preeminent leader of the Latter-day Saints in the county, yeah. But I'm not excited about him being part of the Danites, because that wasn't that good. That was not a good thing. They were a group of extremists inside the church. So, yeah, we talked about the Danites when we talked about Thomas B. Marsh. That was basically why he left. Yeah, was because the Danites had gone and, like, attacked a group of people. And they're like, what the flip are you doing? And he thought it was sanctioned by Joseph Smith. And that's why he left. Yeah. I say allegedly, like, it was never confirmed. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I don't actually know, but, like, he thought it was, yeah. sanctioned by Joseph Smith. Okay. The Mormon War. In the summer of 1838, the troubles of the Mormon War began with the events on the Gallatin Election Day Battle. Oh, here we go, because I think he was there. Okay. In response, Wight armed over 150 men at this time to defend the Latter-day Saints in Daviess County. There we go. It was this thing that he did that caused Thomas B. Marsh to leave the church. Wight was accused, along with Joseph Smith, of organizing an army and threatening and harassing various old settlers of the county. Smith and Wight agreed to be tried in order to ease the tensions of the area. On September 7, 1838, they were presented before Judge Austin A. King, who ordered them to stand trial before the circuit court on bail of $500. After the trial, why did they not say how it came out? After the trial, motions did not abate on either side. The Mormons and non-Mormons in Daviess County engaged in non-fatal conflicts. Non-Mormon vigilantes from other counties came to the county and began to harass the Latter-day Saints in outlying areas, burning their homes and looting their property. Refugees began pouring into Adirondack seeking protection. The Mormon response was to call up armed volunteers from Caldwell County. Combining with the Daviess men, the Mormons split into three groups and raided the chief non-Mormon settlements. Raided. The Mormons split into three groups and raided the chief non-Mormon settlements. Wight led the raid on Millport. See, they did some things that were bad, and people don't acknowledge them when they look back at church history. There were some people who did bad things. This is one of them. The old settlers and their families fled, and Wight and his men looted their property and burned their homes to the ground. Now, to be fair, people had done it to them. However, an eye for an eye will leave the whole world blind, yes? So, following these actions, the Battle of Crooked River took place. Smith advised every church member to go to Adirondack or Far West for protection and strength. When Far West fell under siege after the Missouri Executive Order 44, Wight organized members in Adirondack to assist them. No battle took place, however, as Wight and the other Mormon leaders were arrested by the state militia, and the Mormon militia subsequently surrendered. Okay, so I thought they were mentioning, like, this was all part of Battle of Crooked River, but it's not. These are two different things. So it starts out, the Battle of Crooked River took place, period, and then we're moving on, yeah? Battle of Crooked River is where David W. Patton died, but there were only a few people who died. I think there was 3 on the Mormon side and 1 on the other. Like, you know, a few people died. There weren't that many. Thank goodness. While in custody of the state troops, Wight endured a mockery and vulgarity of the troops lying in the ground in the rain. A court-martial, which might have led to Wight's execution, was averted by General Alexander William Doniphan of Clay County, who challenged the legality of any such court. Instead, Wight and the other leaders were tried in the civil courts. Wight and the other leaders were allowed to escape from jail during their transfer to Boone County on April 6, 1839. I didn't realize it was April 6th. I'm not sure why I missed that before. Kind of cool, you know, that happened to be the anniversary of the church's organization. I like that. That was the day that they got away. Nauvoo era. Wight was ordained an apostle of the church by Smith on April 8, 1841, to replace Patton, who had died in the Battle of Crooked River in 1838. Wight and George Miller became co-responsible for a common stock religious cooperative company / church mill and logging town in the wilderness of Wisconsin. Much lumber for the Nauvoo Temple and the Nauvoo House were floated down the Mississippi River from the several Mormon mills in the area. Succession crisis and Whiteite colony. Whiteite. It's fun to say. All right. Split with the LDS Church. During the succession crisis after Smith's death, Wight felt compelled to follow the orders Smith had given him to found a safe haven for the Latter-day Saints in the Republic of Texas. Brigham Young attempted several times to persuade Wight to join the main body of Latter-day Saints, which he had organized as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in the Alta California area of Mexico, which would become the Utah Territory in 1850. However, Wight refused each time. He rejected Young as a prophet. Wight was eventually excommunicated by Young on December 3, 1848. His most prominent follower, Bishop George Miller, was also disfellowshipped. I'm slightly confused. What do you mean, the Alta California area of Mexico? What the flip does that mean? Alta California was Utah? Okay, I have to fact check that. Let's take a look. Alta California. Oh, it was huge. Okay. Yeah, that was a really big area. Okay. It includes all of the present-day states, U.S. states of California, Nevada, and Utah, as well as parts of Arizona, Wyoming, and Colorado. Okay, I got it. Sorry, I was confused by that. I was like, what do you mean Alta California? Okay, that's what it means. I'll throw up a picture here so that everybody can see what the area was. Now I get it, okay. Okay, Zodiac, Texas. Wight moved his group of Latter-day Saints to the Republic of Texas, and he would eventually found several communities on the central Texas frontier. Wight's followers built the first Latter-day Saint temple west of the Mississippi. Well, sort of. The temple was built in Zodiac, Texas, about 3 miles from Fredericksburg. Sealings, ordinations, washings, and anointings and adoptions were performed in this temple by the Wightites. Really? The only remaining material infrastructure of the colony is the Mormon Mill Cemetery near Hamilton Creek, about 50 miles east by north of Fredericksburg. President of the Church of Christ, Whitite. Whitite would later recognize William Smith as the president of the Latter-day Saints for a short time, and served as a counselor in Smith's short-lived first presidency of his own little church, yeah? After 1849, Wight wrote and stated that he believed the prophetic mantle of church leadership should fall on the shoulders of Joseph Smith's sons. Remember how loyal he was to Joseph Smith, so that makes sense to me. By then, Wight had rejected Brigham Young, William Smith, and James Strang as pretenders to be Smith's successor. In 1851, after the Pedernales River overflowed its bank and destroyed Zodiac, the Whitite colonists moved to Burnett County, establishing Mormon Mill. Okay. Death. Wight died on March 31st, 1858, in Mountain Valley, Texas, at the age of 61. He had been experiencing epileptic spasms. Wight had been living in Texas with a small remnant of his colony. His group had been traveling to Jackson County, Missouri, where he wished to rejoin the remainder of the Midwestern Latter-day Saints. He was buried in his temple robes at the Mormon Cemetery at Zodiac, which no longer exists. After Wight's death, most of his followers became members of the RLDS Church, renamed the Community of Christ in 2001, led by Joseph Smith III. Yeah. See also Castell, Texas, and the Castellites, whatever that means. I'll also throw up our references. So the references are Alexander L. Baugh? Okay. A Call to Arms in the 1838 Mormon Defense of Northern Missouri. From 2000. There's Melvin C. Johnson book from 2006, Polygamy on the Pedernales, Lyman Wight's Mormon Villages in Antebellum, Texas, 1845 to 1858. I'll bet that's very detailed. Michael Van Wagenen, 2002, The Texas Republic and the Mormon Kingdom of God. Okay. Biography of Lyman Wight, The Joseph Smith Papers, accessed last in 2012. Wow. That's a while back, but I'm sure it's still there. Yep, link is still there. Okay. David L. Laughlin. David L. Laughlin Research Files. L. Tom Perry Special Collections. Harold B. Lee Library, Brigham Young University. That's so many names, David L. Laughlin, L. Tom Perry, Harold B. Lee. All to learn about Lyman Wight. That's very funny. Okay. Further reading. Jeremy Benton White, 1996. The Wild Ram of the Mountain. The Story of Lyman Wight. Jeremy Benton White. Was he a grandson or something? Great-grandson, maybe? I don't know. Interesting. They shared a name at any rate. That was really interesting. I do want to look up one more thing, and that is this dead body idea of people from Kirtland. So I'm just gonna Google Lyman Wight. What year was that? 1844? Kirtland. In 1844, Kirtland, Ohio was no longer a primary center for the church, but Lyman Wight received initiatory washings and anointings there in May 1844, related to his previous endowment in the Kirtland Temple. Later that year, Wight left on a mission to Texas, but his colony eventually settled. Okay, I know that. Okay, the only other thing I can think of is that he was rebaptized for people who had apostatized and then died that had been in Kirtland. That's the only other thing I can think of that he had been doing there, because they weren't doing baptisms for the dead. I don't think they were, anyway, in Nauvoo, and so he went to Kirtland to do it specifically there. I'm not sure, though, because it's getting some mixed signals here. So it sounds like he went there to go to the temple, but then, like, if that were the case, what the flip is up with this, like, cold and dead, listing in the old article, which I thought was hilarious, but I still think it's funny. Very funny wording. But there are a couple different possibilities of what is meant by that, yeah? And what I am guessing is that he was baptized for and in behalf of the people who are dead and buried, the cold dead people. Yes. I hope that's the case anyway. I would be concerned if it wasn't. Anyway, I found that really interesting, and it is really good to have a reminder of how very, very involved he was in Missouri. And I honestly think that a lot of the negative things that happened in Missouri just before the Saints were completely expelled was because of Lyman Wight. Like, he was overly zealous. He was this overzealous person. Where you're like, I get that you don't want to be driven out again. I get that you don't want to be, to have to deal with all the things you've been dealing with. It's a lot. But you don't have to go around doing the same things the mob is doing. Yeah, 2 wrongs don't make a right there, dude. And I think that's where he went wrong. Also, the fact that he put too much stock into one person. He was such an admirer of Joseph Smith as a person that he wasn't willing to accept the leadership of a different person. And I think that is actually a character flaw more than a virtue. You can take loyalty too far. And this is an example of that. So I'm not criticizing him as a person. I think that he was, in general, a good person, and what tried to do his best, was just a fighter. He just got up and was willing to roll up his sleeves and work and fight for what he thought was right. But it's just that he took too far. He took everything just a tiny bit too far, even a lot too far. Eventually, all of those tiny bits added up to, wow, you really went off the deep end, didn't you? And that's very unfortunate. It's kind of sad. But I feel like we can learn something from this, that to make sure not to put all of your stock into one person, and to have a testimony of your own independent of the person. Yeah, that's very important. It's very, very important. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video today, and if you did, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.